Now, some of the themes here, which I'm going to touch on, are familiar to those who've been to previous meetings. But there has been some progress made on some of the most important ones. On others, perhaps less than would be ideal. But two issues in particular that I want to focus in on. One, very close to the heart of anyone who knows and loves the Wandle Trail, which is that you can't go along it, along all stretches of it. And there's a particularly significant stretch of the Wandle Trail, which is a gap or a missing link under the main railway line between Earlsfield and Wimbledon, which has been, well, I think it goes back at least 20 years and probably longer, that people have been chomping at, well, why can't we? And we need to find a solution to closing that gap. Well, the solution is beginning to be on its way, and I know I said that a little last year as well. Most recently triggered by the development at Garrett Mill, an artist's impression of which is on the slide. So those of you who know, you've got the Wandle Trail coming here and then going over Truett Street off to Earlsfield, and then along and then back in again. What this does is provide the opportunity to carry on under the railway on that side of the river, which would be a dramatic improvement to the permeability, both for walking and cycling in the area. And as I'll touch on in a moment, there's also possibly going to be a new bridge over the Wandle just downstream from there as well. But this is still at kind of feasibility stage. So there are requirements as part of the planning permission to put aside funding for this. The most significant progress that's been made in the last 12 months or so has been it is now recognised by both Wandsworth Council and Merton Council as a priority project, which does mean to say it starts to be part of the conversation when they're considering how they might invest money such as the community infrastructure levy. And the particular piece of work that is now being done, which is necessary but not sufficient to move this forward, is a feasibility study, which is being led by Merton Council, to essentially draw up what is feasible, what are the options, why won't it happen, why should it happen, who is it who needs to be talked to, but also what formal authorisation and legislation needs to be agreed. Because bridges are quite complicated. It's not just about getting planning permission, it's about the impact on the water, the Environment Agency gets heavily involved, and of course it had to be, didn't it, that the borough boundary between Wandsworth and Merton is a crinkly one, which means that some bits of this, so this is in Wandsworth, this is in Merton. Merton is responsible for the bit underneath the bridge, but Wandsworth is responsible for the development on the other side of it. So you're on a classic sort of boundary challenge here, which we're trying to work our way through. The feasibility study is still not being commissioned, but they're working towards it. And I would hope certainly by this time next year we will at least know what the state of play is. You know, how difficult a job is this going to be? What needs permission? Where is the resistance going to come from, and how much will it cost? It's not going to happen next year, but hopefully it's a matter of 1 or 2 years before things really move forward, and at least the consents put in place to solve the gap. I'm going to move on to the other, as it were, big topic in the Wandle Valley, but one that's been around for a considerable period of time as well. You'll recognise one view there of Beddington Farmlands, with the IKEA towers on the right. It hasn't got the incinerator on it, but it has other vertical structures, pylons, as well. And this is familiar to those who've been to previous meetings, the challenge of how to secure the nature reserve that was promised as part of the arrangements when the incinerator was given planning permission, and the difficulty of gaining public access to the land. So for those of you who know the permissive path between Mitcham Common and Beddington Park, you'll be aware obviously the hides have been put in as the most visible sort of expression of that happening, but there's not been much else publicly happen since. And We've been part of, along with local groups, notably in Hackbridge, but in Beddington as well, just raising the profile of this, as this is not just important to the local area, this is important at a London scale. The total area of green space you're talking about there from Beddington Park and including Mitcham Common is 3 times the size of Hyde Park. We're not talking about a small piece of green space here, but we are talking about a large area of green space which a lot of people actually don't even know is there and certainly haven't got access to. So we're delighted when CPRE London included it as part of its 10 New Parks for London campaign, and that's given it some support. We've also got a bit of legal advice through that, which is putting Sutton Council a little bit on the spot in terms of defining exactly what the planning consent comprises, which is an important sort of matter when you're actually trying to sort of deliver on that. So there's an outstanding issue we're pressing there. But, and this slide is a repeat of last year's, quite deliberately, we have still not secured the long-promised public access. We have been promised a planning application on that public access for a considerable period of time now. We've even seen sort of drafts of that and sort of ideas for that. And so what is likely to happen will be entirely positive, but it's still not emerged. And basically there's no reason, no good reason, why it hasn't. Now, there are ambitions in the community for all sorts of access of different kinds here. This is just some ideas that were generated some time ago. So the level of access currently being proposed isn't as great as that. As the Forum, we've been particularly keen to ensure there's access to a Wandle Vista, i.e. a key viewpoint, in the middle of Beddington Farmlands, which we identified through some research a few years ago. That there's an east-west route, which is proving challenging, which is because otherwise, if you know the area, there's actually very few ways to go from east to west in this part of the world, because this is here. That also would take in some of the Thames water land, but there are routes through, they're just not open to the public. And then slightly separate to the Beddington Farmlands is the issue of access on the west side of the railway line between Bedshead and Mitcham Common on that side, where there are other landowners who need to be brought into the story. And that's where the bridge was lost over the railway a few years ago. We're hopeful that we're weeks, not months away from this planning application. And certainly there are people now on site who can deliver the planning application, which is very welcome. It's also, if you've got a wetland, it generally has to have water in it. This was a photo I took in early August. Now, I haven't been back in the last week to see how we're getting on. Obviously, it's been a bit of rain since then, but wetlands need to be able to cope with dry spells. And sorting out what happens to the water, which comes from the Wandle, through quite a complicated route via Thames water, is critical to the long-term management of the wetlands. We believe there are solutions which are not being implemented, which require Thames water to get more hands-on in finding a way in which they can use the water that they're responsible for more effectively to keep recharging the wetlands and the scrapes, which are vital. And not the point in going to hide if all you're looking at is a dry space. But on the positive side, and there are positive moves, there's now a ranger, Charlie, is now reasonably well established, technically employed by Sutton Council, and slowly beginning to open things up. There's now opportunities to volunteer at Beddington Farmlands, but there's also been a bit of a break in the vital citizen science that has provided the ecological record of Beddington Farmlands over many, many years. That record is going to have a gap in it now because of the way in which that was handled. Hopefully that will restart and those records will come back. But it's a fairly important part of the story of any nature reserve. You know what's happening to the wildlife and that you've got the records to secure that. It's also important that Sutton Council keeps on the case. To be fair, it is constantly asking good questions, but it's not yet getting great answers, and has repeatedly requested an itemised plan for how they're going to deliver on the nature reserve so it's ready by the time when it's meant to. One of the issues is that this whole area has now been sold off. So it was Veolia's responsibility. Veolia has sold its entire landfill operation around the country. And so that includes all the land, essentially we're talking about, not the incinerator, which continues to be, do I mean Veolia? I mean Viridor, don't I? Viridor. Viridor continues to run the incinerator. But the land around it has been sold off, and it's now the responsibility of Valencia Waste Management. And I suppose, to be honest, we're still trying to work out what the change means, because it's not been dramatic in terms of the impact on the proposals. But there will be more progress, and hopefully there will be some really good news to report by this time next year. Now, there have been a number of other developments around the Wandle Valley. I'm not going to go into details on them, but they're quite large, some of them, and some of them are near completion. A couple of these are very close, so this is actually a stretch of the Priory walls, just over there, and very close to the arch, of which the story of which is told in the far corner. This is the Wandle at night at Collier's Wood. So this is a plan for development by the massive tower that's already there by Collier's Wood Underground Station. So that's looking at the Wandle with the bus station on the left here, and the walls over here. The pickle comes in and goes under. And this is a very substantial plan for the gasworks in Wandsworth, which for that stretch of the Wandle is a really important part. Lots of changes going on in what's a bit of a sort of strange area of sort of unused land and buildings where the Wandle starts to get close to the Thames. And as you can see, this is potentially there's a very substantial new space being created by the Wandle if any of that goes ahead. The top left and the right haven't got planning consent yet. The bottom left is almost complete. We are talking to, as is the Wandsworth Society, the developers of the Wandsworth Gasworks about making the best use of this, and the intention is that there'll be sort of, well, they dress it up, don't they? But shops and cafes and whatever available, so people will be able to rest and enjoy the Wandle. And there'll be a new way of getting out of there, which just isn't available at the moment. There will be further consultation about that, and I think they're doing, I don't think it's quite the same as the National Trust is doing with Merton Priory Walls, but they're getting kids involved in a project there to think about the Wandle's future in that location. I mentioned bridges, because bridges have been a recurring theme of the last year. Some of them real, some of them still to come, or maybe they never will come. So there are 3 bridges here. There are others which have been sort of thought about. One on the right is Mitcham Bridge, the bridge over the Wandle, where there used to be a ford, right by Watermeads and Ravensby Park, on the main entrance into Mitcham, if you're coming up from Rose Hill. That collapsed in a flood because of the way the contractors left things in the river. And has had a massive new rebuild, controversial locally for all sorts of reasons, but is a substantial new addition to the Wandle, and also marks the parish boundary. This is a very likely bridge, but not guaranteed, to the development of the Eddie Cat site, just down the road here. So that would have a new bridge over to that strip of the Wandle Trail that goes around Sainsbury's. And this, we were talking about Ravensby Terrace earlier, this is meant to be another bridge just downstream from the missing link that we talked about at Earlsfield, associated with the development there, which will provide a straight route into Earlsfield Station for people on the west side of the river. And again, if you get that and you get the access under the railway, that really changes the whole geography of that part of the Wandle. That's obviously happening. Some people don't think it's complete, but the council, I think, do. This seems to be happening more slowly than it should do. Depends on the planning consent, but they're finding challenges like they don't own it all, so therefore it's going to be difficult. Well, that was fairly obvious if they've done their homework. And this is linked to the feasibility study for the the missing link as to whether that goes forward or not. Behind the scenes, a lot of these decisions depend on what the policies are in the local plans that are drawn up by the boroughs. And Croydon, Wandsworth and Merton's local plans have all been up for grabs in different ways over the last year. So we've been feeding into those, and we went along and gave some evidence at the inquiry into Merton's local plan. Our main point being the Wandle should be much more central to what you're doing. You need a more consistent approach, so you can't tell the borough boundary by different attitudes across the borough boundary. You need to be creating space alongside the riverbank. The buildings need to be appropriately designed, and you need to get your maps right and map the open spaces in the right place and get the regional park in the right place. Every borough deals with the Wandle in a different way, so it's not surprising it's a bit of a hodgepodge in terms of planning decisions that are being made. Here's a bigger idea, which may or may not progress, that part of the Wandle Valley should become linked to an area of outstanding natural beauty. So you'll know that Box Hill and Leith Hill and places like that are in the North Downs area of outstanding natural beauty, or the Surrey Hills area of outstanding natural beauty. Well, actually that chalk, in particular off the North Downs, comes into the south side of London, and the Wandle itself rises underneath the ground in the dry valleys of places like Coulsland. So these are proposals which are looking at, they're exploring the possibility of extending the area of outstanding natural beauty to the areas marked and coloured on that map. So we were invited to feed into that. We made positive noises, and we'll see where that goes next. It's Natural England's responsibility to move that forward. It doesn't actually get to any of the wet bits of the river. It will just be the dry bits. On a more difficult note, we've not been without some serious pollution incidents in the Wandle, and the Wandle has a sorry history of pollution incidents. The photo on the left is the somewhat infamous coming together of the outflow from Thames Water's sewage works, which is what's coming on here, and the chalk stream, which is the main tributary for the Wandle everywhere that goes upstream of that. I mean, it is interesting to note, just be reminded just how much water is added by Thames Water sewage works to the Wandle at that point in volume terms. But you can see that looks dark, that doesn't, that's pollution, that's crystal clear chalk stream. And it smells. And it smelled. I mean, I took that photo. And it carried on. Now that took place during that, we had that one great storm. And so it was reported, the Environment Agency, looked at it, didn't physically look at it, but looked at the issue and said, well, that's entirely legal, because that's what you can do in a storm with floods. You basically just can flush out the water. Some of the other incidents that have been reported, clearly not legal, but no one can find the source, or no one is there on the spot to find the source. And then there are complexities that there are other sources of pollution to Thames water, so you've got to be really specific if you're going to start to accuse people of polluting the river. So there's always a reason why nothing happens. But it is important, despite what we're told about the Environment Agency not looking into things, that unless things are reported, they certainly aren't going to look into things, so keeping reporting. 0800 80 70 60 to report pollution incidents. And they do, in the sort of immediate sort of contact with them, they handle it really well. And it is worth doing. You're not hanging on to some Muzak and, we'll get back to you in 5 minutes and we're really busy. It is worth doing. But it's not just as it were, the main river. This is, some of you saw this today, this is Pickle Ditch, which many would consider to be the original course of the Wandle. And there are other tributaries as well. So pollution is a significant and recurring issue, and we are feeding into that much wider campaign that I'm sure people are aware of, which is raising the profile of the wider pollution of the country's watercourses. On a more positive note about tributaries, This is a new tributary. Well, it's not new in the sense that it's always been there, but it's now, you can see it because it's been daylighted. It basically was an underground channel, and someone's come in and stripped away what was above it, and you can see Wimbledon Park Brook. And this is linked to the work that's been done on Wimbledon Park Lake, which is also a dam. And so dams need special legislation to make sure they're safe and all the rest of it, and the works that have been necessary there. One of the benefits has been the daylighting of the brook. And the friends of Wimbledon Park, I think it was, but forgive me if I got that wrong, were writing recently about how it performed, because actually seeing it and seeing how it works for the first time is really quite special, I think. And there are other opportunities to daylight the river. There's a stretch from Wandle Park, Croydon, where it goes through, which could be improved. And of course, the big one would be Southside Shopping Centre, which isn't going to be there forever. Southside Shopping Centre won't be there forever, and as and when that site becomes developed in Wandsworth, there's a very, very large area of the Wandle which has disappeared forever, it seems, underneath that, although there have been people who've kayaked the Wandle on the Southside Shopping Centre. Wandle Valley Regional Park it's not technically its logo, but people associate it with it. The Wandle Valley Regional Park Trust is the other kind of Wandle-wide organisation, and just a quick update on where we are with that, because it's been in abeyance effectively since 2019, after the departure of its earlier director. I am a trustee of that by virtue of being part of Wandle Valley Forum. It continues to be in abeyance, but some research was commissioned, funded by Sutton Council, to look at options for its future, and a copy of that we have made available. So if people do have any views on that report, which was produced by consultants, then do feed them in. One of their recommendations is very much to rethink the Wandle Valley around the issues of climate change, to give it a bit of a focus as opposed to trying to do too many things, the regional park. But ultimately, I don't think much is going to happen here unless someone steps forward to want it to happen. It requires somebody to want to lead the Wandle Valley Regional Park Trust for it to go anywhere. And thus far, that hasn't been where people want to put their energies. And so it will stand or fall, I think, on that and the enthusiasm that people have got for it. On the plus side, and we saw an advantage of that, benefit of that today, the National Trust has become a bit more visible, I'd say, over the last year in the Wandle Valley. Some of the specific ideas which we heard today about very practical conservation work on the wall, the grade, what is it, grade 2? 2, yeah, a listed wall. But then the wider idea there for a new green space or pocket park, but that also plugging into a wider issue around, well, what's the role of the National Trust, what's the opportunities for green corridors in the Wandle Valley, and opportunities there to plug into the story of the National Trust, some of which started in the Wandle Valley. We were pleased to be able to give away more than £3,000 worth of grants. Some up to £200, and also a special grant to the Wandle Industrial Museum for some of the way in which it's changed the view of its building on the outside. Really up for either in the conversation now or afterwards. Wandle Fortnight could go in all sorts of different directions. So if people have got ideas, do please feed them in. And if you want to get involved in Wandle Fortnight as a whole, then please do put your hand up. That's just some of the examples, I don't know if you can all read it, of the examples of things that are going on, just to give a flavour for the diversity of stuff. So AGMs are happening. Okay, I didn't think that was going to get you all coming to it. Craft fair happening, top fishing tips are happening, blue plaques, some cycle rides, textile displays. We've got one behind us. I think we'll be hearing more about textiles in a moment. Practical issues like how do you look after a pond in the cannons. Some bell ringing has been going on. Book conservation has been happening. Stone carving. So lots and lots of different sorts of activities and places opening up for the public to enjoy and to visit. And to stay in touch, I think most people here will be in contact with us already. It's another reason for me to say, please keep circulating the attendance sheets so we capture your emails. So but if you could keep those going around the tables, that would be great. But the easiest way to stay in touch is just to give us your email tonight on the forms or drop it in on our website, because it will automatically happen.